In June 2009, the French national airline Air France suffered the most severe tragedy in its history. Flight 447 crashed into the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 228 people on board, including passengers and crew. No one could believe that Flight 447 could have crashed. Because, at that time, the Airbus A330 was considered the largest, most modern and advanced commercial aircraft ever built by mankind. It is often compared to the Titanic of the skies, due to its similarities with the legendary ship. It seemed perfect, yet in the end, it collapsed so easily, utterly defenseless. The investigation into the tragedy gradually revealed many mysterious details, so surprising they were nearly inexplicable. However, even these details raise more questions than they provide answers. So what truly happened in the final moments of that fateful flight? What caused the aviation industry's icon to collapse and shatter? Was it merely a human error, or did it conceal a more profound conspiracy? We will now return to that moment, to unravel the mystery of the Titanic of the skies. On May 11, 2009, Air France Flight 447 took off with 228 passengers and crew members on board. The flight departs from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and lands in the capital city, Paris. After 3 hours on a flight that was supposed to last 11. The astronauts made radio contact with Brazilian air traffic control as per procedure, reporting the aircraft's current position over the Atlantic Ocean. Everything is proceeding normally at the moment. However, after 8 hours of flight, Flight 447 was unable to land in Paris as scheduled. The French government was forced to declare a state of emergency at this airport. It took 5 full days for the debris of the ill-fated aircraft to be found. Amid the rubble and shattered aircraft parts, only 50 bodies were found. 178 other victims and the victims, who are at the core of this issue, are still missing. The disappearance of Flight 447 is considered one of the greatest mysteries in modern aviation history. The French investigative authority has released 2 detailed reports on the identified entities. But they were only able to draw a few superficial conclusions about the cause of the disaster. And things like this cannot stop those who are truly passionate and have a special interest in flights. Together with leading aviation experts from around the world, we have joined forces to find the most satisfactory solution. Perhaps we should start by looking up the air traffic control records for Flight 447. To find clues about the airplane's final moments. During the initial investigation phase, the most critical task is to focus on analyzing the last known position report. In this case, it appears in the final exchange between the pilot and air traffic control. The records do not show anything unusual. In the final radio broadcast at 1:35 a.m., the pilots reported their current position and altitude. Flight 447 was at that time approximately 550 kilometers off the coast of Brazil, which perfectly matched the initial assessment and calculations. 1 minute later, at 1:36 a.m., Brazilian air traffic control attempted to contact the crew to confirm the handover of the aircraft's control to the control station in Senegal, Africa, but received no response. However, the people on the ground at the time simply believed that atmospheric interference between 2 different climate zones had caused the disruption of high-frequency information exchange. Therefore, air traffic control did not have sufficient grounds to report an emergency situation. 10 minutes later, the aircraft vanished completely from Brazilian radar screens, but this in itself was not necessarily a problem. Experienced astronauts are well accustomed to the reality of being entirely self-reliant once they cross that distance. A short time later, the signal from your country's air traffic control station will continue to guide the crew. However, in this situation, the employees not working in Senegal would forever lose the chance to welcome and guide Flight 447. After 6 hours of desperately sending out distress signals, they still hadn't received any response from the outside world. Strangely, while the aircraft vanished from radar screens, its flight computer, which was programmed to automatically send location reports via satellite, continued to transmit data. And this revealed an extremely important clue. After the final radio contact at 1:35 a.m., the flight computer of Flight 447 sent automatic position reports at 1:40, 1:50, 2 o'clock, and finally at 2:10 a.m. Based on the reported positions, the aircraft debris was found after exactly 5 days. And once everything had been discovered, the pivotal question was posed: what caused this tragedy? A formal investigation has been launched by the judicial authorities, and other aviation experts have also gained access to a large volume of image data. This allows them to nearly restore the found fragments to their original state. As a result, the overall picture of the ministry is gradually coming into sharper focus. Some believe the aircraft exploded mid-air, after which the debris gradually drifted in the water currents and sustained further damage, leading to its current condition. There are only two possibilities for this to happen. One possibility is that the plane was bombed and exploded. Second, it is due to technical malfunctions within the aircraft itself, most likely originating from the fuel tank. The first scenario is highly unlikely, because if it were a terrorist attack, it would have likely been carried out in a crowded place, or at the very least, a well-known location that everyone recognizes. Only in that way could the terrorist organization send a deterrent signal to the entire world, aiming to achieve their overarching objectives. Not to mention that at present, security at airports is tighter than ever. There is no way terrorists could have infiltrated a large, modern flight like an Airbus A330. The fact that the plane crashed in such a remote and isolated area, like the far-off sea in the Indian Ocean, makes the second scenario more likely. A complex machine like an airplane is always built from countless small parts. If just one of them makes a mistake, everything can spiral out of control. However, there is an extremely difficult problem: too many pieces of the puzzle are missing. Only two parts were considered fairly good: the tail fin and the bald patch on the nose. But with that much information, it was enough to determine one thing. It was highly likely that the aircraft did not explode mid-air. If debris from the radome impacts the tail fin, it may break away from the aircraft and fall into the water. That means it remains relatively intact, due to the relatively low weight and falling speed of the debris. However, in reality, the nose section of Flight 447 was severely deformed. The force acting on it upon impact with the water is extremely powerful. The plane's nose did not fall separately from the sky. An aircraft breaking apart in midair could not possibly cause that type of damage. An aircraft can only shatter into numerous small pieces if it plunges into the sea already severely damaged. If the plane is intact upon impact, the recovered debris would merely be crushed or deformed, not fragmented. However, the floor section found in the cargo hold added another double piece to the puzzle. Both broken floor pieces were bent and bulged upward in the center. The damage indicates that the aircraft struck the water in a parallel attitude to the surface. Under the influence of immense water pressure from below, the components became deformed, distorted, and bent. Whatever the cause of the accident may have been, at least we have untangled one knot. Flight 447 fell straight down from the sky. It did not explode mid-air. Clearly an Airbus A330, manufactured by the world. Despite having up to 700 aircraft in operation, there had never been a fatal accident until the events of Flight 447. This reliable history is built upon an extremely rigorous computer-controlled automatic flight control system. This generation of extremely powerful computers is designed to control all operations, from flight speed and altitude above sea level to changing the aircraft's direction. That was the Titanic of the skies, a palace in the air that was once believed to be unsinkable. So why didn't things go as we expected? On a conventional aircraft, the control stick directly actuates the mechanical system, which in turn drives the hydraulic components. But on the A330, that heavy mechanical power transmission system was replaced with an electronic one. You just need to describe to the computer what you want it to do. The aircraft's computer will perform the necessary maneuvers to adjust the flight path, enabling the plane to turn onto the correct intended course. A process like this could cause the A330 to lose altitude, as the computer system requires a certain amount of time to convert the pilot's control inputs into actual flight maneuvers. Therefore, to compensate for the potential loss of altitude, the computer will increase power and raise the aircraft's nose to provide sufficient lift. Thanks to this maneuver, once the process is complete, the aircraft will enter a stable state. Although equipped with an automatic flight control system, please note that this system will not execute any pilot command that risks compromising flight safety. So it's impossible for such a modern aircraft to crash solely due to pilot error. There must have been an external factor, one powerful enough to bring down Flight 447. Within the 400 pages of documents released by the authorities, one critically important detail has been discovered by many. At 2:10 a.m., Flight 447 entered an area containing a thunderstorm approximately 400 kilometers wide over the Atlantic Ocean. And according to the records, the aircraft flew straight into the storm instead of attempting to avoid it. Think that pilots actually want to fly through a thunderstorm just to save time, no matter how modern the plane they. Remember that the cockpit is located at the front of the aircraft, so in the event of an accident, the pilots will be the first to bear the consequences. So why did the Airbus A447 fly straight into the storm area? Within 3 days, thunderstorms typically develop horizontally and can reach heights of up to 15,000 meters above sea level. However, observing a storm at night is very difficult. Astronauts need support from weather radar to avoid extreme weather phenomena like that. However, the radar also has an operational range of just over 100 kilometers, and it cannot display thunderstorm cells or lightning strikes. It located the storm by measuring the amount of water and ice in the dark clouds. However, because ice reflects radar waves approximately 5 times worse than seawater, pilots are forced to continuously adjust their radar settings to detect storms of smaller scale and intensity. By analyzing NASA satellite data from the night of the incident, researchers have partially explained why Flight 447 was unable to avoid such a violent storm. Clearly, they could detect the storm from a sufficient distance to fly away from the danger zone, yet the plane still headed straight into it. The answer to this puzzling event is, when the aircraft was approaching a major storm but had not yet entered radar detection range, a smaller storm blocked the radar's line of sight. They knew the storm was coming, but because they thought it was only a minor one, they decided not to take shelter. They failed to recognize that a larger and more dangerous storm was approaching from behind. A remarkably rare natural phenomenon, a storm within another storm. From this, we can formulate a new hypothesis. The aircraft experienced a technical failure due to an extremely severe lightning storm. The crew members did not detect the object because their vision was obscured by a smaller storm. It's possible that by the time the crew recognized the massive storm, the entire aircraft and its passengers had already entered the eye of the hurricane. In this situation, there are many potential dangers that could destroy the aircraft and claim the lives of everyone on board. First, it can be affirmed that the greatest threat is scrutiny. In a thunderstorm, no one can predict where lightning will strike or how frequent it will be. For a large commercial aircraft like the Airbus A330, it is constructed from superior materials, capable of withstanding even the most extreme weather conditions on Earth. During operation, each aircraft typically undergoes several inspections and evaluations each year. Aviation scientists and engineers initially concluded that a bird could not bring down an airplane. However, upon careful consideration, it becomes clear that this is a mistaken conclusion. The phenomenon of aircraft being struck by lightning is quite common, and while it rarely causes serious enough damage to bring down an airplane, it is entirely possible. The deadliest accident in the history of U.S. aviation occurred in 1967. A Pan Am Boeing 707 aircraft crashed after being hit by a missile, which caused a fuel tank in the wing to catch fire. All 81 passengers and crew members perished. In 1988 in Germany, a small Fairchild Swearingen Metro passenger plane was struck by lightning, which broke off one of its wings and caused it to crash. All 21 people on board the aircraft perished. In the 21st century, although very rare, bird strikes have also been the cause of aviation accidents resulting in human casualties. In 2010, a Boeing 737-700 that was struck by lightning had to make an emergency landing at the airport on the island of St. Angra. The crosswind was so strong that the airplane slid off the runway while preparing to land. The aircraft fuselage broke into 3 sections, killing 2 passengers. But for an aircraft like the Airbus A330 of Flight 447, there existed another, far greater threat, perpetually lurking within the storm zone. This threat stems from the chaotic movement of air currents. When handling this phenomenon, the automatic system is tasked with maintaining the aircraft's stability throughout the operation. To ensure safety when the aircraft is about to enter a turbulence zone, the flight crew must instruct passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Then, as a necessary compensatory measure, the pilot will reduce the aircraft's speed to alleviate stress, and the remaining tasks will be handled by the automatic system. Other than the things that unfold with meticulous precision, the manual thrust adjustment controls remain completely stationary. The entire process is controlled automatically by the system. During turbulent motion, a sudden updraft of air can violently toss an aircraft up and down. An onboard computer system instantly adjusts the motor's intensity and power to reduce speed, keeping the aircraft at a safe velocity at all times. All the pilot needs to do is monitor the equipment. Therefore, when flying into the storm area, whether due to lightning strikes or atmospheric turbulence, there has not been any impact strong enough to conclusively determine the exact cause of the accident. We need writing practice sheets. We must practice a great deal to become proficient, and the only way to improve is through persistent practice. We need to have the STELs, but where can we find them now? Fortunately, over time, these detailed documents have gradually been revealed. The official report has given us a clearer picture of the events that occurred on the peak day of the pandemic. At 2:10 a.m., as the aircraft was flying through the storm, the computer system sent a series of error warnings to the Air France headquarters in Paris. Typically, these ACRS alerts are designed to warn of basic, secondary aircraft faults while operating on the ground, enabling them to be quickly resolved before the aircraft takes off. If you didn't know, ACRS is an acronym for the Aircraft Communication Reporting System. The passage refers to a digital data link system, which enables the transmission of essential short data and messages between aircraft and ground stations via radio or satellite waves. According to ACRS's assessment, this type of alarm is not considered serious, so no one was monitoring the data in real time. Typically, they will be fully charged before the aircraft lands. However, this time, everything was completely different. The message from Flight 447's ACRS system revealed an incredible sequence of events. The first notification appeared at 2 hours 10 minutes and 10 seconds a.m. The first ACRS message appeared when the automatic driving mode stopped functioning. The primary audio warning is recorded with the purpose of attracting attention. When the autopilot system disengaged, the pilots were forced to take manual control of the aircraft. 13 seconds later, another urgent announcement was transmitted back. The flight control override law also shows that the function to prevent unsafe pilot actions had ceased to operate. 24 seconds later, another self-adjusting component was further tightened. That is a conventional system, which features automatic adjustment of engine thrust to maintain the aircraft's speed and altitude. One by one, the aircraft's automated safety systems ceased to function. Finally, at 2 hours 14 minutes and 26 seconds, just 4 minutes after the incident began, a final message appeared, indicating the situation was developing in a rather unfavorable direction. The cockpit's speed suddenly increased along the vertical axis, triggering a warning message. The cockpit is plunging downward at an extremely high speed. In other words, the plane was diving at an extremely high speed. A few seconds later, Flight 447 plunged straight into the Atlantic Ocean, exactly as we had envisioned in the scenario at the beginning. It fell parallel to the water's surface, subjected to an immense force from the pressure, like a powerful slap, which caused the debris to become crumpled and dented. Why did this situation happen like this? What caused a series of state-of-the-art safety support systems on the Airbus A330 to cease functioning? Among the reported messages, the most important notification is the report concerning the computer, the module, and the high speed. The speed of the airplane could no longer be determined. The loss of the aircraft's speed information is an extremely serious incident. When this control link malfunctions, the automatic flight system will be unable to operate. Therefore, the system will also cease operation. The cause of the slanted nose is directed toward the aircraft's speed measuring instrument. All large commercial aircraft use pitot tubes to measure airspeed. To explain this device more clearly, please direct your attention here. A pitot tube is a pressure measurement device used to determine the velocity of a fluid flow. It was invented by the French engineer Henri Pitot in the early 18th century, and was improved into its modern design by French scientist Henri Darcy. The pitot tube is commonly used to measure airspeed on aircraft, the flow velocity of water on ships, and the flow velocity of liquids and gases in industrial equipment. Not only that, but this device can also be used to measure the local flow velocity at a specific point in the stream. And it is not possible to measure the average flow velocity in the pipe or conduit. The automatic flight control system cannot operate without accurate airspeed data. Therefore, the A330 has at least 3 pitots to support data provision. However, on Flight 447, the error messages indicated serious problems with the pitot tubes. Therefore, we need to figure out what caused Mr. Pitot to fail. Pitot diverted the aircraft, plunging deep into the endless low-pressure airspace. The aircraft's speed is determined by the computer converting the received pressure. The Airbus A330 was flying at an altitude of over 10 kilometers while crossing the Black Lion Sea region. By stopping the fuel supply, it was observed that merely partially blocking the conduit caused the measured speed of the aircraft to immediately drop to zero. So a similar incident had also occurred on Flight 447 with Mr. Pitot. The first thing that usually comes to mind is the phenomenon of water freezing. At an altitude of 10 kilometers, the temperature is so cold that it falls below the freezing point, which is the fundamental cause of this phenomenon. But to prevent that, pitot tubes are designed with an extremely robust hot swap mechanism, capable of handling any situation, even severe storms. If it wasn't due to water freezing, then what caused them to stop working? The main answer is the storms. At the altitude where Flight 447 was traveling, the temperature can drop to -40 degrees Celsius. The peculiarity of this temperature, combined with the aircraft's violent shaking while flying through the storm, can create what is known as supercooled water. I will help you better understand this type of water that sounds quite unusual. Supercooling is the phenomenon where a liquid remains in its liquid state even when its temperature has fallen below its normal freezing point. It will crystallize when it contains a seed crystal or a nucleus, from which a crystal structure forms around these seeds and transitions into a solid state. Without a seed crystal, the solution can be cooled to a temperature at which all seed crystals spontaneously appear simultaneously. Germination can occur simultaneously at the liquid-solid phase transition temperature. But if this temperature is reached without the simultaneous formation of crystal nuclei, the substance will become an amorphous solid. Water typically freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, but under standard pressure, it can be supercooled to approximately -48 degrees Celsius, the point at which ice nuclei begin to form homogeneously. This supercooling process requires the water to be extremely pure and free of nucleation particles, meaning there must be no presence of crystals or any other impurities. To better visualize this, you can look up videos of supercooled water experiments on YouTube. Just a light touch or letting a piece of metal come into contact with it, and the fruit will instantly turn to stone. Given the aircraft's instability in the alert area, supercooled water droplets are likely to collide with each other. And gradually, crystals form around the inner surface of the tube. Supercooled water can rapidly freeze on the heating elements within pitted tubes, causing them to become blocked in a matter of seconds. Technical issues with the pitted tube on an aircraft are not uncommon occurrences. 6 years before the crash of Flight 447, French aviation authorities had identified 32 incidents related to faulty pitted tubes. For example, the Airbus A330 aircraft series. And by 2009, the number of incidents had reached an alarming level. An incident occurred approximately every week, and this pattern continued consistently for 2 months leading up to June 1. Just 6 days before the plane crash tragedy, a similar A330 on a flight from Rio to Paris had also experienced a malfunction with 2 of its pitted tubes. But fortunately, the pilots managed to regain control of the aircraft in time. All of the aforementioned deactivated pitted tubes had met the current safety standards. Therefore, the pitted tube on the A330 aircraft can still experience issues, such as becoming blocked. And now, when we string all the events together, we get the following story. First, the Airbus A330 aircraft detected a small storm while flying over the Atlantic Ocean. The pilots decided to fly straight ahead, completely unaware that a far more terrible storm was waiting for them behind their backs. Upon entering the storm zone, the severe weather conditions caused the pitted tube to malfunction, triggering a cascade of automatic safety systems to shut down. However, we cannot place the entire blame for the disaster on the machines while ignoring the most crucial factor, humanity itself. Air France Flight 447 took off that day, as the airline was in the process of upgrading its entire fleet. The new members of the troupe are very talented but still inexperienced in handling emergency situations. When forced to operate everything manually after the self-driving feature became inoperative, they are now encountering a series of technical glitches, most of which were previously unknown. No sooner had this error occurred than another one immediately followed. For them, handling them that night was truly overwhelming. Why is this aircraft experiencing such issues? What are all these malfunctions? Why are they all occurring at the same time? Battered by a cascade of malfunctions, the crew now faced their most critical challenge, maintaining a safe speed. At that altitude, every commercial aircraft is forced to maintain its speed within a very narrow range. If Flight B447 accelerated or decelerated by just 20 km per hour, it would enter an extremely dangerous situation due to aerodynamic instability on the aircraft's wings. S angle of attack must increase to maintain lift. However, if the speed becomes too slow, the airflow will no longer follow the wing. Regardless of the situation, unstable wings cause the aircraft to enter a state of free fall. Pilots must avoid abruptly decelerating or accelerating the vessel and must ensure the speed always remains within the permitted limit of 20 km per hour. But with the frozen hard drives, they had no way to determine their exact speed. This catastrophic aviation accident was the result of a combination of mechanical failure and human error during the flight. In reality, many people disagree with this perspective, as they believe that when machinery malfunctions, astronauts would be completely helpless and unable to do anything to improve the situation. Is there any other way to resolve that complicated situation? An experienced pilot instructor who participated in the experiment was able to maintain stable speed and avoid instability while operating with the mouse rule. They did the same with the variable parameters on Flight 447. The pilots were completely unaware of the challenges ahead, much like the situation of Flight 447. They were flying the plane at an altitude of over 10 kilometers through the night, above the vast ocean. On the radar screen, dense, black clouds began to appear in an ominous manner. The captain had planned a detour to prepare for the turbulent air currents ahead. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are currently approaching a rain shower. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts for the next 10 minutes. The aircraft will be diverting around this area of inclement weather." The decisive moment of Flight 447 had arrived. All 3 airspeed sensors on the test aircraft had failed. The aircraft's automatic control systems ceased functioning. The test pilot took over, manually flying the plane. If the aircraft's actual speed increases or decreases within a range of 20 km per hour, they may temporarily lose control. But the pilot applied the standard trained procedures. He adjusted the throttle to set the precise thrust at 85%. He then pulled back on the control column to raise the aircraft's nose to the prescribed 5-degree angle. With the engine operating at 85% power and a 5-degree upward angle, the aircraft will always maintain a safe speed. Without instruments displaying speed, inclination and power are the pilot's vital indicators. These pilots ignored all error warnings until everything was truly safe and under control. Although the aircraft lacked the necessary speed display instruments, by maintaining the proper bank angle and power setting, it was still able to reach the nearest airport. The emergency situation was resolved. The simulation results show that a safe speed could indeed be maintained even when the airspeed sensor, pitot tube, malfunctioned. So why was the crew of Flight 447 unable to apply this technique? When Flight 447 began to enter the storm zone, the first standard procedure was to reduce speed. At this point, the auto thrust system will automatically decrease engine power. The power indicator will be displayed on the central control panel. However, if the automatic thrust control system is disengaged while the engines are operating at low power, the pilots would not be able to monitor that low thrust condition. They failed to recognize the need to increase power and overlooked the fault warnings, just as the 2 highly experienced instructor pilots had done. In conclusion, the tragedy of Flight 447 was the result of a chain of interconnected events and causes, encompassing natural, human, and mechanical factors. Once again, this incident demonstrates that no matter how advanced machines may be, they remain human creations. In the most extreme situations, only humans can save themselves. We sincerely thank you all for your companionship and support throughout this period. We have just journeyed together through one of the largest aviation disasters in history. On behalf of the entire team, I send our warmest greetings and look forward to seeing you in our next videos. Wishing everyone a productive day at work and peaceful moments with your families.